All right, so last chapter we started on corporations, and so all the remaining chapters are on corporations or some aspect related to them. And this chapter is on investing because a lot of corporations have stock. So that's what we're going to talk about. All right, don't forget to read those chapter objectives on your own. And, you know, it's interesting because we have all different ages in this class. And so some people are used to the thought of investing and some people aren't. And that's okay wherever you are. But the goal, generally speaking, is typically to have about 80% of what you were earning before you retired when you retired. Now that seems pretty impossible. And most people don't get pensions anymore. And so you can go to the Social Security website and get an estimate of what your Social Security would be. And then you got to figure out how are you going to make up the rest, or can you live on Social Security? So when you retire, you'll no longer have to pay into those things that you do when you're working, such as Social Security and Medicare, and any work expenses you might have had, like, you know, a super long commute, a toll road, work clothes, that sort of thing. But for most people, their medical costs increase, and they might even need to go into a nursing home. So, is the nursing home that you could get government funded sufficient for what you want, or do you want someplace even nicer? Then you're going to have to make up that money somehow. All right, so what is an investment or security? It's when a person invests their money in something that's common, like maybe AT&T stock, and expects to get profits based solely on the efforts of someone else. So if you buy AT&T stock, you're not working at AT&T necessarily, and you're hoping to make money off of the people that actually do work at AT&T. There's nothing wrong with that. It's completely and utterly legal. Just trying to understand what we're talking about here. So investments can include notes, stocks, bonds, IOUs, certificate of deposits, interest in oil and gas rights. It can cover a whole bunch of things, not just stock. All right, so there's two main stock exchanges in the United States of America, but there's many smaller, more regional ones in the U.S., and there's ones all around the world. So NSE, or the New York Stock Exchange, and NASDAQ, or National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotation. So NSE was recently sold to NASDAQ. Well, not that recently anymore, but so they're kind of one and the same. But there's no stock floor anymore, no trading floor, if you will. It's all done via computers now. So investing has really changed over the last few years. Okay, so we're going to have a stock purchase exercise just to kind of get you used to the idea of thinking about investing. And you don't actually have to buy the stock. In fact, it's not required for the class. If you wanted to on your own, of course, you're allowed to. But what are some things to think about when you get ready to actually buy a stock? You want to look at the value of the stock versus, actually, the value of the product versus the stock price. Now, Starbucks is a big exception to this. Because Starbucks, you know, you can go and spend $4.45 or more, sometimes less, on a drink at Starbucks, and it costs them about 9 to 10 cents to make. So that's not a good example. It's kind of an exception to the rule, but usually when something costs 9 to 10 cents to make and then it's being sold for $4.45, it's not always a good idea to invest because that product price might be super inflated and it might drop. So for example, Hatchimals were the hottest toy recently, and they're these animals, and they're like a combination of two things, like a giraffe ribbon, so giraffe Raven. And they were huge. And parents were paying more than they were worth because it was so hard to get a hold of them. And these Hatchimals would hatch from a plastic egg that would crack and then come out. And they were like little robotic stuffed animals, if you will. Well, the problem with that was, they had a good product, but kids' toys are notorious for, they're hot one year and not so hot the next. So, were they potentially overpriced? Stockholders were really upset that the next year they weren't nearly as hot. So these are things to think about. Other things to think about are how much competition does a corporation have? So, for example, right now Amazon doesn't have a whole ton of competition in terms of online shopping being quite as big as it is. But it does have some. So does that make it a good buy? Probably so. Does it have the right amount of competition? Another thing to think about is Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, has said he would not invest in something he does not understand. So try to pick something that you understand when you invest. And I've given you some more examples of things online that you should be considering when potentially purchasing a stock. Alright, so stock options. Okay, so in San Diego we have a lot of companies that have stock options, Qualcomm having been one. And what it is it's an incentive for employees basically. And it says that you can buy at a certain price known as the striking price. So a company says, hey, we're going to offer 1,000 stock options at $10,000 a share. So that's a total of $10,000. Okay, the employee uses all options and spends $10,000. Okay, but when the shares are sold, they're selling for $15,000. I mean, $15 per share. Excuse me. So 1,000 times 15 would be 15,000. So the person could stand to make a $5,000 profit. So when does somebody want to buy at the striking price? They want to buy at the striking price if the stock is already selling above that. Now, another way to make money off of stocks is not just when they're sold, but sometimes you can get dividends as well. And there's three main types of dividends. There's cash, shares, or property. And cash are very popular. And then next is shares, and least popular is property. So cash, you can reinvest and buy more stock or shares. Shares is you get more shares anyway. But property is probably the least popular. So like if you had Kellogg's Raisin Bran stock, you would actually get Kellogg's Raisin Bran. And a lot of times people invest in stuff they don't really love, so that becomes an issue as to whether or not they actually want the property dividend, because you're supposed to pay taxes on that too. It's over a minimal amount of money. Alright, so when can a corporation issue stock? Pay dividends, Pay dividends. So basically, if the corporation can pay the minimum on its credit card or its debts, then it is able to issue dividends. So this actually encouraged companies to go into more debt and not get out of debt. So that's kind of an issue. All right. A company is not required to do dividends, but once it's declared, it becomes like a debt that's owed to the shareholders. All right. So whoever owns shares on the record date, and it's a line in the sand, it's just an absolute line. Owns shares on this date. It's usually 30 days prior to the shareholder meeting. Then you get dividends. And if you don't own, if you've sold or you haven't bought yet, then you don't get dividends on that date. All right, taxing. A corporation is taxed, and shareholders are also taxed on the profit. that the corporation makes. So the corporation makes a profit, it's taxed on it. It issues dividends, and then the shareholders are taxed on it as well. So that's called double taxation because it's basically a double tax on the same profit. And you pay taxes on cash dividends in the year that you receive them. And you pay taxes on property and share dividends on the years that you sell them, All right, stock splits are often done to encourage trading because it reduces the price of shares. So usually share prices hopefully go up if you've invested wisely, but sometimes it gets so expensive people don't want to buy. All right, so let's say originally one share was $10, but now with the stock split, an investor can get 8 shares for $10. So instead of $10 a share, it's $1.25 per share. The investor still has something that's worth $10 though. So it's really just kind of a marketing ploy to sell stock. All right, the Securities Act in 1933 and 1934 are typically what apply to stocks. And the way I remember it, and I believe in mnemonic devices and little things help me remember, the way I remember it is the 1933 Act comes before the 1934 Act, so 1933 deals with the original issuance of shares, and 1934 deals with everything after that. And if we sell shares between states or nationally, then it's a public offering, and it is governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, EDGAR, or the Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis, and Retrieval System, is run by the SEC, and it will give you a lot of the information on stock. It's not real easy reading. It's pretty dense, but if you want to find out more about stocks, this is a place that you can go. All right, this requires all the different information about stocks, so investors can really make a good decision. You can read the list on your own. All right, the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 is what started the SEC, or Securities and Exchange Commission, and they make the rules and they look into fraud regarding shares and stock and require ongoing disclosure. So a company has a 10-K, which is an annual report, and that's information about the business, significant changes within the last year, and a general summary of the last 5 years. Now, when it says K, like a 10Q, not 10, it's Q, like a 10Q, that's a quarterly report. All right, so the 10Q is the quarterly report, like we just said, it talks about finances and equity, and it kind of just gives an update from the last quarterly report. Now, section 10B, it specifically talks about, fraud, trying to get around SEC regulations. All right, you shouldn't make untrue statements about stock. Also, you shouldn't do insider trading. Like if you're a director, there's rules about whether or not you can buy, sell stock, and what time periods. There's also Section 12 companies under 1934 Act, I should say 34, and you have to have over $100 million in assets to be a Section 12 company, or greater than or equal to 500 shareholders. There are some exceptions to this rule, but typically if you're that powerful of a company, they want to impose even greater standards on you, so to speak. Okay, so 8K goes into more information about that. And short swing profits. So it says any profit, whether it was insider trading or not, made by buying or selling stocks by a director, officer, or 10% shareholder in less than 6 months the corporation need to get that money back.